They are a brand new assistant professor, like last month, or 2 months ago, 2 months now, at University of the Pacific, and they'll tell us about their work looking at barriers to seed sourcing in California.
Hi everyone, it's been such a privilege to get to hear from so many of you today about the really exciting work that you're doing. I have been really excited about a lot of these topics and been thinking about them for the first decade that I've had of my research career so far. I'm just coming off of doing a Smith Fellows postdoctoral fellowship in which I was interested in looking at the conservation genomics of 2 endangered vernal pool plants here in California, each which have less than 30 extant populations surviving, and thinking about how we can utilize genetic diversity through space and time in order to help them to be climate resilient to the increasing fluctuation in interannual precipitation that they are dealing with. And it involves conservation genomics, and I have whole genome shotgun sequencing data that I collected with the collaboration of Nolan Kane, and 2 years of reciprocal transplant data, and as well as a social science component. And as Jay mentioned, you get really excited and have a really ambitious postdoctoral plan, and it can take a little bit more time to get all of those pieces together to be able to share the results. So I don't have results to share today from the first 2 components, but I hope to have it in the near future. But I do have some really exciting findings from the social science component, which I think is really important because we need to understand, in order to support restoration and climate adaptive restoration, we need to understand what is happening on the ground. What is actually happening when these seed sourcing decisions are being made, so that we can identify and deal with the barriers that prevent people from doing climate adaptive restoration. So I was really excited to have a bunch of different folks from different sort of angles of the native seed supply world in the room today. That was also the case for this native seed sourcing panel that I facilitated at CNPS meeting in 2022. We had native seed producers, we had restoration practitioners, and some of the kind of emergent themes that came out of that panel was overall this concern about a lack of communication and integration between different sides of the native seed market, and in particular mismatched timelines between when seeds are being requested and the time that it takes to prepare those seeds to be available at a commercial scale. And then a number of other barriers and constraints for effective seed sourcing. And I looked, and there really wasn't anything in the literature about these issues, and I think that, policy makers like to see data when they're, in order to change policies that affect these barriers. And so, having worked with some social science collaborators over the last couple of years, I gave it a go at doing some social science to sort of address this issue. And so, in collaboration with partners at the Chicago Botanic Garden and a number of nonprofits in the Midwest native seed world, we did this survey of restoration practitioners to try and get a sense of what their current methods are for sourcing native seeds for restoration, what factors are limiting their ability to adopt what are, in their view, their ideal practices, and then what are their top priorities in seed sourcing decisions. Are they prioritizing local seed? Are they prioritizing high genetic variation? Are they prioritizing climate resilience? So We got a lot of input and feedback during the design process of the survey, and ended up putting together this sort of 10-minute questionnaire that we distributed to restoration practitioners via social media and different listservs like GrassNet and SurCal and CNPS. Participants were individuals 18 or over who were working or volunteering for organizations conducting restoration plantings. And our two focal regions were California restoration practitioners and those in the Midwest region. And we're going to be doing some comparing and contrasting down the road, but for the sake of today's talk, I'm going to be focusing on the results from the California participants. There we go. All right, so we had 142 respondents from California. So these are respondents whose organizations are sourcing seeds for restoration plantings in California. Over 30% of those were affiliated with nonprofit organizations, but we also had a pretty good representation of for-profit restoration practitioner organizations, federal and state government entities, and a variety of other types of affiliations. Most commonly, in terms of the respondents, were restoration practitioners or conservation professionals. We got a number of other responses because people have a lot of special titles. We're going to be reclassifying some of that back into these other categories, but some of those that were unique included native plant suppliers and general managers, lots of different management roles in these companies. Because this was a focus in California, the majority of seeds were sourced from California and were being used in California-based restoration, but we did have some spillover into surrounding states, Oregon and Washington and Nevada and Colorado, and then one case as far out as Kansas. And then a pretty wide spread of different habitats that are being restored: grasslands, riparian and ponds and lakes, woodlands, wetlands, and then the other category, some of the big additional ones that we didn't include were chaparral and urban areas for the California context. So going to the results related to our first question, what methods are currently being used? To orient you to these graphs, we used Likert-style survey questions, which are pretty common in social science, where we have a statement and people will respond to what degree they agree with that statement or to what strength. So we saw that for some characteristics we were interested in asking about, we saw that, around 40% were saying that more than half of the time they were getting seeds from source-identified wild populations, and slightly less but still significant amount said that they were mostly sourcing within 50 miles from their planting site. And significantly fewer people responded affirmatively to sourcing from multiple wild populations, and also very few with seeds certified by an official agency. How often, so these are different types of seed purchases, and the most common seed purchase was off-the-shelf native seeds, with fewer contract wild collections, contract grow-outs, and a mix of multiple for a single project. So this was one of the really big takeaways that confirmed what we were already getting anecdotally, how far in advance seed is being requested. So more than 45%, almost half of the respondents said that on average they're requesting seed less than a year out from when they're needing to plant them, which from talking to all of the native seed producers that I have talked to is not enough time. And for reference, this is a figure from Doug Eaton at Great Valley Seed, and shows sort of a model of the production process to get a new local ecotype up to scale for seed producers, and with an estimated sort of 3 to 5 year timeline, and that is like very different. So from what I've heard from a lot of seed suppliers, they're having to sort of fortune tell what people will be wanting 3 to 5 years out, because those aren't being requested on that timeline. And then factors that are limiting practitioners' ability to request seed farther in advance. Seasonality, that's one that we can't really get around very easily. That's just a constraint of the job. But people also listed grant and funder imposed constraints as one of the larger factors. And then we got some more sort of qualitative information from the other responses in this category. A large one was availability, and permitting was also one of the factors that people brought up. So, sorry. Oh, so we asked them, to what degree have you adjusted your seed sourcing requests based on historic availability? And half said that at least to somewhat or to a great extent, they are. And I think, again, they are buying, this is because they're buying largely off the shelf with less than a year out until the project needs to be in the ground. Those seeds need to be planted. And so there's the fortune telling of what people are going to need, and then people are sourcing based on that fortune telling. It's just not a very efficient sort of structure. There is at least a perception amongst restoration practitioners that seeds are sort of less than half the time, or sort of more than half of the respondents said that sometimes or never were they available at prices within their project's budget or in the quantities needed for the restoration. So here I wanted to share just a couple of quotes from respondents that I think help characterize some of the take-home messages that I'm getting from this data. Another barrier is availability of locations to collect seeds, especially here in California where grazers stripped off 99.999% of native grassland plants 150 years ago. Another response that grant deliverables and funding timelines are the main restraint. They don't want to pay for organizations to establish relationships and create co-managed timelines. They usually just want to see acreage and plants in the ground, which does not necessarily create valuable habitat. And finally, what are practitioners prioritizing in their seed sourcing decisions, given all of these constraints that they're under? First we asked what resources they're using to make these decisions, and the largest contributing resource was just inside knowledge within their organization, and less so state level governmental guidelines was the next common response, followed by research in the peer-reviewed journals, and then the National Native Seed Strategy was the lowest response, but this was before the release of the California Native Seed Strategy, so hopefully people are utilizing that as a resource. And then, this is where we can hopefully contribute, but it has to reach them. And then the highest priority of the three that we presented was maintaining local genotypes, followed by maintaining genetic diversity, with climate resilience coming in at the lowest ranked of the three. And so some of the take-home messages based on, my initial assessment of the results is that logistical and economic barriers that we've identified are limiting practitioners' abilities to incorporate climate resilience into their sourcing decisions. And there are barriers that we need to resolve around this grant timeline and production timeline mismatch, access to wildlands for native seed collection, and maybe a hyper-local sort of mentality, because it's complicated, because obviously we've seen some of the history of restoration and how much it took to get to plant native species in an area, and then to plant within that region. And so I understand why we've now gone, okay, well, it needs to be local, but thinking about climate resilience, maybe we're thinking too local and not considering other options. And so one bit of hope, because I don't want to leave you on a downer, is that there are a lot of emerging native seed networks around California at multiple different scales that are trying to make these connections between the seed producers and the practitioners who need the seed for the restoration. And they are happening at the regional scale and at county level, at city level, at all of these different scales. Only 16% of the respondents said that they were currently part of one of these networks. So I feel like if we can establish these stronger network collaborations, we'll also need some changes in policy, I think, but this is one bit of hope of maybe a way to help improve the situation in this native seed market integration. Thank you, everyone.